Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Um, Today I'm here with Veta Greenstone, a good friend of mine who used to work with me and my team a while back. And Vita is currently in the U.S. Vita, where are you exactly in the U.S.?
Louisville, Kentucky. Well, the burbs of Louisville, Kentucky.
The Burbs.
Yeah.
Okay, and but she's based in Israel, so her husband is currently here. Her kids and her are currently in the U.S. You left there, from what I recall, like way before any of this war broke out, right? There was
Yeah, I
like
was
a
here.
month
Actually,
before.
not way before, like a week before I came to visit my mom was like the last month of my maternity leave. And
Yeah,
here we are.
yeah, and you were scheduled to come back like beginning of November, right? Is that still the plan?
Yeah, I was actually supposed to come back November 8th, and I got an email today from United that there are no flights, which I think we knew, but seeing it, in print it was hard to see.
Yeah. Wow. The truth is, I mean, like I heard that there was like limited flights, but I wasn't aware how much. Like it's really like nobody's in, nobody's out kind of thing, huh?
I don't know. I've heard so much conflicting information. I've heard it's only LL, and then I heard that like there was a surge in ticket prices, and then other people said no. So I think there's a lot of kind of this. First of all, the situation is obviously changing super fast, but there's
Right.
also just a lot of rumors going around. Regardless, I mean, Mar and the family asked me to extend my stay here until things calmed down, so I knew I wasn't flying. But again, seeing it like in black and white was it's different.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to get together with Rita because I think part of the story that we have here is not just an Israeli story. I think that it extends outside of the Israeli framework and it goes out into the Jewish framework. And we see this across and maybe even beyond the Jewish framework, but we'll see. We'll see if it extends beyond that as well. Um, and so one of the things I wanted to do was talk to some people who are currently in the U.S. and if I find people in Europe, I'll talk to them too to see how things are there, and both on on a local area. Like I don't know if there's anything going on in Kentucky. It's not like let's say the same thing that would happen in New York. So you can share with us if there's anything there and how people are. Um, how I mean I don't even know how much people are aware of what's happening. In Israel and Kentucky, but you'll share that with us also. And also, just as a Jewish person who, moved to Israel, has a lot of people that they know in the U.S. or, and how that affects, your perspective on what's going on, and also as a person who made Aliyah, and and what is it like to go through your first war, or, maybe not your first military operation, because that happens every few years anyway,
Right.
but your first war. So yeah, so let's get to it. So maybe we can start with you with the the local stuff,
Yeah.
and if you want to introduce yourself, you're welcome to introduce yourself a bit more than just what I did, which was one of my friends. You're
Right.
welcome to do so. But yeah,
No, I mean, the parts that I think are going to be relevant to this is I come from a Soviet family. We came as refugees after the fall of the Soviet Union in '93 to Louisville, Kentucky. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the area, because most people don't know where Kentucky is, it is staunchly Bible Belt, kind of mid. It's not. It's south for us, but it's not south like Texas South. But a very heavily Christian religious area, pretty conservative. Louisville itself is, like most major cities, kind of a blue dot in a very red state. Um, and also, I went to. I'm going to try and avoid all these buzzwords. There's a lot of things flying around of like liberal universities and all that. Everyone likes to have these hot topic words. But I went to college here. I went to Vanderbilt, which is it's a really nice school, but very even when I was there, they had a lot of kind of scandals about this. Not specifically this topic, but kind of like freedom of speech and these big issues and all that. So I
right.
was exposed to kind of a very right wing crowd and a very left wing crowd and all in between.
I see.
Um,
And
and
and when did you move to Israel again? Remind me.
2016, a month before Trump was elected. So
Wow.
yeah, it was a lot. It was an interesting time. Also, my family and I have very different political views on that, so that was interesting on very many levels.
Yeah.
And I definitely miss the days when I was in the Middle East and looking at America and being like, "Oh, are you guys okay? Things are crazy." um,
Just,
but
I'm assuming that this is clear by that comment, but I'm assuming that, like that people understand that you're much more liberal leaning and
yeah, I'm what I
yeah,
would say
versus your
I'm
family.
left of center for sure. I wouldn't say I'm like radically far left or anything like that, but yeah, my parents are very staunchly right. They came from the Soviet Union, so I can understand their boomerang.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of, been exposed to a lot of different backgrounds and spent a long time with a lot of different people. So going back to Louisville, like I said, it is. I would say some people, at least the people that I've talked to, are very aware. I've been really lucky, and I don't know if this is, just a subset of my experience, but I've had so many, former teachers and people that I know reach out to me and ask if I'm okay and how things are going. And I'm actually I'm very grateful
Well,
and very fortunate for that. I've had a couple people, I wouldn't say reach out to me directly, but there's been a little bit of the other side where people post kind of crappy memes, the Instagram infographic, and they want to kind of start this debate. And I'll go back into that a little bit later, but you know, it's really exhausting, I think, to debate your humanity with someone who thinks it's like a theoretical exercise. Um, and so, luckily, like I said, my experience has been really, really good. And I've also been obviously very fortunate to have a very soft landing. And, here in my parents' house, I was able to borrow a car. I was able to integrate pretty easily, which I was able to do.
do
And
you mentioned your parents are from Russian, like they're they have like a Russian background there that they moved from Russia. The This actually brought up a topic in my mind right now that I hadn't thought about talking about, but I wonder. I'm assuming that they consume a lot of Russian television.
yeah, so actually,
Yeah.
my family is split. I mean, they're all former Soviet Union because that's what it was at the time. But my family is half Russian, half Ukrainian. So they consume very
Wow.
opposing medias with very
Wow.
staunch views.
Okay.
Yeah, which makes for
Yeah.
interesting dinner conversation, of course.
So in the
Um,
context of what we're talking about here, when you're now in the U.S. with your family, do you get like yeah, do you get some like preliminary Russian intel into what Russia is doing and how Russia is approaching this whole conflict?
I've gotten limited. I mean, I will be honest. I think also you said this in some of your earlier messages. For my sanity, I've tried to take lots of steps back because I'm just trying to, get through the day with the two kids and not think about this constantly because it weighs on you.
Right.
But my
Right.
mom and my parents, are very much reading and involved in everything. And so I got kind of a view from my mom of these Russian websites, and she's saying it's very, I mean, it's a little bit veiled, but it's pretty, you can see like the Iranian connection. Like it's problematic. There's a lot of propaganda.
Yeah.
No one's maybe necessarily want to get directly involved, but you kind of have to say something, and it's not positive. Let's say from the Russian side, and I would
So
say,
the Russians, you're saying what do you mean by the positive? You mean the Russia that the things that they're being exposed to are describing the conflict like semi-neutrally, but really with an anti-Israeli tint. That's what you mean by not positive?
again, this was from a few comments that my mom has made, so don't hold
Yeah,
me to a word.
yeah.
But
Of course.
it's been, they condemned atrocities, which is good because that apparently can't be taken for granted.
Right.
Um, but there wasn't, staunch support. There's pretty much, there are a lot of ties between Iran and Russia, and a lot of kind of, I don't want to say Cold War, but there's this whole East-West. There's a whole wider
Sure.
conflict here. There's a lot of things
Yeah,
at play,
yeah.
and so
For sure.
there,
Iran has been supplying like some weapons to Russia in its Ukraine war. So like obviously
yeah,
there's issues that are happening over there.
yeah. And I think
Okay, I got it.
from the Ukrainian side, I think they've been pretty public about their support of Israel. So yeah, you get
For
the full
sure.
range.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
But yeah, going back to
Yeah.
kind of how it is in Kentucky, I think first of all, people
Right.
in the South are super friendly. I mean, I think Israelis are super friendly and willing to go into deep conversations with you by sitting next to you on a bus. But American friendly is different. I don't know. People just come up and talk to you in a park, which is fun, but also kind of terrifying. I'm not used to it. So I've had a couple people, and they're just like, "Oh, like do you know X, Y, and Z about this park?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm visiting." And they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And then at that point, and I hate that I feel this way, but at that point, I kind of have to be like, "What am I willing to say?" Because I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know if I have the energy for this. I don't know if it's like a safe thing to say, But I've kind of gone ahead and a couple times that this happened, I've shared and everything, and the responses have been really kind of lovely, like heartwarming. They definitely want to discuss
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things, but people are, at least maybe because I was in front of them and not behind a screen, they were kind of just saying like, wow, what's going on? Like and they wanted to talk about it openly and not kind of repeat sound bites to me. So that was nice.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely figure that if you're, if you don't have a strong opinion to begin with, and you're actually just, the first thing that would stand out to you is like the story of what, how this whole thing started. And definitely in a Christian environment, that would even speak to you even more. Um, yeah, no, I understand. Okay, at least you have support in that sense. And you said that some teachers reached out to you. Teachers from
Yeah,
what for
I've
you?
actually
From
had a
high school?
high
From
school,
college?
high
From where?
school. I had actually some people that I worked in a lab, like a former professor from college that reached out. But yeah, most of my so I went to Catholic school. I should have also included that in my background because I think it's a little atypical for Jewish kids. Um, but yeah, my teachers, I've had, I mean, at least 5 or 6 reach out, and not just like, hey, hope you're okay, like repeatedly reaching out, repeatedly saying, we're going to pray for you. We're talking to everybody at the church. I've also, had former colleagues or current, sorry, I'm on maternity leave, but, I've had verbal people reach out and from the States that have been really lovely. So it's been really nice because it didn't feel like lip service. It's definitely felt very genuine, and the support is
Yeah,
it's helpful to not feel so isolated, especially when you're so far away.
right, right, for sure. Um, and before we get deeper into the main topic we wanted to talk about, which was the what you're feeling like, in terms of like all the things you mentioned about like people debating your existence or your humanity, as you said, online. How is your husband doing here in Israel?
He is hopefully good.
Because he's not an Ole Chadash, right?
No,
He
no, he's
was
born
born
in
here.
Haifa. Yeah.
Right.
No, he's local. He is an infantry medic somewhere in the north. Obviously, we don't get into details, but
Of
he's
course.
luckily able to check in about once a day because both me and my mother-in-law are a little bit neurotic messes right now, and so he's mostly trying to calm us down, which I'm sure is exhausting. But there have been daily check-ins, and I think that's been really helpful, especially in the beginning when there was this kind of overwhelming sense of, I don't know, devastation, despair, whatever you want to call it. I think having
Right.
that was like air, to know that at least, there's all these atrocities, but at least this one person that is the center of your world is okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's I mean, I'm both myself and my wife. I mean, we have people now in the army, but we don't know anybody directly who was hurt. We know people that of like relatives that were hurt. Like my one of my bosses now, his nephew was killed, etc. But we've been fortunate in that way, and also like there's this very um, yeah, it's like the one of the biggest issues with what happened over here, right, is the sense of lack of security anywhere. Suddenly, we had a period in which there was no southern border effectively, and that means any place is at risk. So,
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think
that was very, very scary.
it wasn't just the first 36 hours like you mentioned in our previous episodes. There kept being these little, much smaller scale, but there kept being these little kind of breakthroughs in the north and all this, and I'm like, what, where are our fences made of holes? Like what? All
Right.
of a sudden there were all these reports, and I I do want to kind of give a shout out. We actually do know somebody, our veterinary nurse or vet tech, I guess, was murdered at the festival.
Oh God.
Um, yeah, and our current neighbors, well, our former neighbors when we lived in Kachmuna, they've been evacuated, so they're luckily able to stay in our house because I'm abroad and my husband is away. So it's obviously I don't live in the kibbutzim in the south. I don't know. I would say I'm farther removed from these atrocities than I'm sure many people. But considering I only moved to Israel a few years ago, it's pretty close to home.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, it's like I think one of the things that really it's Israel, first of all, is a very small place, obviously. But I think one of the extra elements that made this affect so many people was that festival because people from all across the country came there, right? It wasn't it wasn't just as a even if it was just geographic, it would have made a difference in terms of people's willingness to give everything for that and to run down there to save people if they could, and we would all be hurting because that's just the way Israel is. But specifically because so many people, like there was like a few thousand people at this festival from all across the country, so everybody. I think that we had on the day, I think a day or two after the thing, after it all started, my wife heard somebody from the building next to us like cry out, and then later she pieced it together that one of her grandchildren was in the festival. We don't know them, but suddenly the it was she figured it out. Anyway, yeah, it's really been horrendous. So yeah, so tell me a little bit about, there's I guess, there's both personal elements for you about the things that you're experiencing from some of your people that you know online, or maybe even know personally and are now just in touch online with. And also there's also, like, I guess, a broader thing, right, of like what you would have expected from the, let's say, the higher echelons of the more progressive, more left-leaning people in terms of their sensitivity to this issue and to what's happening. That, when we talked about chatting, this is one of the things that came up. So if you
Yeah.
want to just share some of what you've experienced and what you feel.
I think honestly, it's kind of going through the stages of grief. I haven't hit acceptance yet. Probably not ever. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of just. I'll start with this. I think that, I'm not going to go into this whole, the issues of the modern world, but I think that what we've seen repeatedly with, social media and the way that it is like there's such a lack of nuance. And people aren't really interested so much in the details, or I think you've called it short memory, but it has to be packaged nicely in an infographic. It has to be 20 seconds, whatever. And that's not reality, and there's just I have a lot of anger because I find that there's a lot of arrogance. I'm going to change names, obviously, but, somebody that I knew, acquaintance even is a strong word, but, we're friends on Instagram or whatever. And, this person, let's call her Susan, from Indiana, white, upper class, I think we met on vacation in Costa Rica. Okay. Like she's doing fine. No connection at all to this conflict in any way.
Right.
She's Christian from Indiana for, forever. And
Mm-hmm.
she was one of the people that posted kind of a crappy meme that was just it was very smug. It was very snide. It was very just like, I looked at it and I was just like, okay, you know what? I know this girl a little bit. Like maybe I usually don't engage because these things are so like draining for my
Right.
soul.
For sure.
But I was just like, okay, maybe she just doesn't understand the enormity. And she'd also posted it on October 7th. And it was about, how it was like, Jews are good, but the Israeli army are genocidal monsters. And I was just like, maybe not today, And I was like, maybe she really, she's so removed. I doubt she has any foot, anything in this race. So maybe she's just, maybe we can have a conversation. I
Right.
was wrong. And there's just such arrogance because she's like, well, I'm entitled to an opinion. And I'm like, I mean, I guess you are, but like, okay, inform yourself. Like, and you don't have to take my opinion. You can totally be diametrically opposed, but like, do something. If you don't just post a crappy meme, right? You don't have to just do this like
Right.
armchair activism. Like, if you really care, do something, organize, donate, whatever, even if it's something that I diametrically oppose. But,
Right.
and there's also this concepts of like, there's no concept of the history. And I'm not pretending that I'm an expert in the region either. But, all of a sudden everybody's a geopolitical expert in the Middle East when they couldn't find it on a map. Nobody
Right.
knows anything about, they're acting like all of our neighbors have been there for hundreds of thousands of years and we just came after the Holocaust and popped a squat. And it's confusing to me because, like I said, I'm in a very Christian region. So they're like, oh, Jesus from Nazareth and Bethlehem. That's acceptable. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, but he's Jewish and from this region. And
Right.
they're like,
Where
yeah,
where
that,
where did he come from?
that.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, but let's draw that. And it's
Yeah.
like, there's no connection. There's like these little pockets of belief, and it doesn't matter that there's dissonance because nobody's really looking that hard. And there's also just this arrogance of like, people are, I don't know, there's this again, people that are not involved in any way, but feel like they have the right and the responsibility. And I understand, especially like my age and college age, like to feel like you really have to change the world. I'm not diminishing that. But there's this concept that's so removed from the real world of like fairness in war, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the numbers are uneven, so obviously you guys are genocidal. And I'm like, what? Like, the problem is that we're not dying enough? Is that just so I understand?
Right.
Um, and, you know, all these, and like I said, I'm pretty left of center. I try to believe in human rights and that there's hopefully a better way to do things. And I came from a family that went through brutal regimes, and I don't think that that's what we should be either. Like, I'm not making fun of this like enlightened liberal mindset. I think that there's very much value in some of it, but this concept of like, no, war is fair, but like you have to do all these things, and we as the like international community are going to do no, we're the ones like keeping you honest, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
despite completely ignoring, I don't know, half of the things that the U.S. has done. And I'm like, you know, if we're going to go into it, first of all, I don't accept your narrative of colonization because I think it's rewriting history in a very weird way. But how are you sitting on that Native American land? Are you planning on giving it back? You know, and
Yeah.
people all of a sudden don't want to talk about it, and that was only a few hundred years ago. And
Right.
I think that I
Yeah,
see a lot of
I'll just interrupt you
yeah,
for just 1 second with like a few small things about that. First of all, there's a really good um, um, recording from 10 years ago or something with Carolyn Glick. She's a Israeli American, um, meaning she's, I guess, originally American based on her accent, but she's Israeli. She's been a right wing activist for quite a while. There's this recording which I found again after all this, even though it's 10 years ago, which I'll send you after, and maybe I'll post it here also in this in the video, where she's sitting with um, a bunch of emissaries from Europe. I think it was like a representative of the European Union and maybe one or two of the Nordic countries. I'm not sure. In this public forum, like some sort of a discussion, and then they say to her, "They're, we think," they say to her, "that you should of course be happy that we judge Israel, and put Israel into a higher standard than the Hamas or whatever, because you're like us. We're treating you like one of us." And then she looks at them and says to them, like, I think that's like completely, like like, disgusting and condescending. Like, what does that mean? I should want you to judge me higher. Like, who the heck do you think you are? Like,
yeah,
what exactly? What kind of like moral pedestal do you think you stand on that you're going to tell me that I have to care, that you're going to judge me in like like at a higher standard? So there's like that, there's that, and she, I mean, like she really let them have it, and of course the clip ends at the end of her speech because that's like that I don't actually know what they said to her in response, but from my perspective that was the end of the
yeah,
whole meeting. Um, and the and the second thing really is that what was the other thing that I wanted to say? Well, you continue. There was something else that popped up. It will surely pop up soon when as you
yeah,
continue.
no,
Sorry. So yeah.
I was trying to remember where I was going. I think kind of like you mentioned, there's this. I mean, I think there's a lot of trying to fit on pre-made narratives onto the situation, and Americans, I guess, kind of tying into like you're like us. Like, yes, on the one hand, I don't think that just because someone is genocidal or homicidal that you should be at their level. Like, that's again not who we want to be. That doesn't, the two wrongs don't make a right and all that. But I think that there's, we're trying to fit in. Especially, I'll talk about it from like the American university level. Like, there's a big, and it's not even now. It's been many many years of racial tensions
Mm-hmm.
and this idea of you know I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Basically, determining it's how you identify in groups, I would say, and who gets to choose your identity, you or someone else, and how do you present? Are you white
Right.
enough? Are you black enough? Do you decide if
Right.
you're what I mean? All those things. It's very complex. I'm not gonna be able to do it justice, and I'm not saying that there's not merit in it, but it's really frustrating because you know I'll go with Jews because, the historical time period, Jews weren't white enough for the Aryans.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're a little bit too white. And, the Palestinians are seen as the the kind of the racial minority, and somehow we're this big oppressor. So it's kind of, we're very conveniently labeled in whatever narrative seems to kind of match what people, and I get it, like you see the world through your lens, this is what you know, and you try to make that fit. But it goes
Right.
back to what I said about nuance, and it's so much more complicated than that. Jews are from everywhere, obviously.
Right.
And, I'm sure, I don't know who's watching the podcast, but if you don't know, please do some research. But all over the world, all
Yeah.
colors and
I mean,
shapes
you
and sizes.
have, like a year or two ago, I forget how long ago it was, but there was this thing where, Whoopi Goldberg, she's on that show The View, right? And I'm not sure if you heard at the time, but she had she made this big, uh, big mistake or whatever you want to call it, when in the conversation about racism or whatever, she said that the Holocaust wasn't about racism. It was just man's evil against man or something like that. And then when they told her, "What do you mean? Of course it was racism." She said, "No, I mean, it was white people against white people. So it
Right.
wasn't racism." And even that alone, I mean, let's even pretend that all the Jews were white, right? Um, she said, like, one of the things that she said that I thought was just telling how little she understood about this topic was she said, "Look, if um, if the Nazis were going down the street and they saw me and another Jew, they wouldn't be able to recognize the Jew." And I'm like, you don't know anything about anything, because like anybody who's come from Russia knows that, and I don't see it because I don't know, but that Jews and native Russians look different, and people segregate based on these elements, right? They can tell, that you're part of a
And I
different
mean, we're
ethnic group,
labeled.
just
I
because
have it
it's,
in my documents. My nationality is Jew.
yeah, yeah, just
So,
because it doesn't express itself necessarily in the pigments of your skin doesn't mean that so you have a bigger nose or bigger ears or whatever it is, and they can just tell because compared to the society you're within, it's very clear.
yeah.
And yeah, but then people think, well, then it can't be racism because it's not about the color of your skin. So I guess it must be just man's hate against man, and then you don't fit into the narrative of oppressor oppressed and all the things that people spoke so much about in the context of BLM and George Floyd and all that other things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I totally get this. I think that there's people so desperately want something clear. You want clear good, you want clear evil. You want things to make sense. And now we're inundated with information constantly that you don't even, the news outlets don't have time to fact check. And, let alone
Right.
you and, the manipulation of your algorithm and all kinds of things. And I think it leads to this level of just kind of exhaustion. I know, at least for me personally, that you're just like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't know what to believe. I'll take a step back. So either it's apathy or, echo chambers, and then you get more radical or whatever. But people so desperately want to be, I don't want to say want to be told what to believe, because I think most people take offense to that. But people want something that's like very clearly, conveniently palatable. And it's a complex situation. And it's just, I don't know. It's been really,
Yeah.
there are certain things that shouldn't have been complex. You know what I mean? Like, again, you can have whatever opinion diametrically opposed to me, and it's fine. But I never imagined that there would be any controversy about condemning, rape, torture, abduction of children. And there
Right.
is. And people were
Is
falling
it
over themselves, and they were tearing. The thing that still kills me to this day is you see all those videos of people tearing down the posters of the kidnapped people. Like,
right?
there's a kidnapped
Right.
poster of the 3-year-old redheaded child.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to me. But how can you? Everyone sees themselves as the hero of their story. Obviously, no one's doing this, hopefully, to be just a jerk. But how do
Right.
you go back and say, yeah, I'm a good person because I'm taking down, like, this person either deserved it or it's fake? Well, like, how do you justify to yourself that you're taking down posters of people that objectively civilians that were kidnapped, or falling over
Yeah.
yourself to justify it?
Are kidnapped. They're currently
Yeah,
kidnapped.
sorry,
They're
are
right
kidnapped.
now,
Yeah, yeah.
and why aren't you for them returning? Why is that? Yeah.
I think, and then I
The
think we see it also. I know there was the comments of the UN chief of like, oh, it didn't happen in a vacuum, and people are very
yeah, yeah.
quickly all of a sudden trying to do context. And I get context is a thing in every situation. This didn't start yesterday, but like some things are
Yeah.
should be so morally clear,
Right.
and
Why is it not obvious that they should be able to see the Red Cross? All the usual, the demands. It should be obvious in these situations, right?
yeah, and also I have, this is the part I think that really broke my heart. It only was a few people that I, ended up blocking or unfriending or whatever, but people that are highly educated or doctors that I really respect, that in the early days when we still didn't understand how the scale of it, when it was still the numbers were 100, 200, and not
Right.
1,400, that we're very quickly saying, okay, but be careful because they're going to call us terrorism, and and they're going to try and frame it for you this way, and they were just falling over themselves to say it doesn't matter what, it's going to be justified. And I just I couldn't. I think that's it's heartbreaking
Yeah.
to me because I don't understand the goal really. I don't understand people's ultimate goal, and I feel like unfortunately this is a conflict that everyone likes to signal about and everyone likes to talk about, but I feel like most people don't really want to solve. I don't know, like if you really want to go out and do something, go do something or go help, or I'll talk about it a little bit later, but like nobody said anything that Egypt didn't open the Rafah crossing for trapped
You
civilians. Like
know?
why is this story only Israel Palestine, as if there's no Arab world, as if there's no, not Arab world, there's no US, there's no Canada. I mean, there's towns
Yeah.
in Italy that'll pay you to live there because they need people. Take these people. I know, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you can't make people leave. It's a form of ethnic cleansing, whatever. There's these whole things, but like at the end of the day, I assume, and this foundational kind of belief of mine was also a little bit shaken, but I assume that most people just want to live and want their kids to live, which is apparently not the case for everybody. Um,
Yeah,
but
you see
where's the
people,
world in this?
going around in you see people going around in the streets of London. This is like, I'm assuming that there's more than this, but one of these Muslim or Islamist protestations, and he's saying, the West or the Jews love life, but we love death. You know,
Which is
like
awful. I don't understand that,
that's
and
what he's
and that
saying.
I don't.
And I'm not sure if you saw this, like one of the, I know you're not consuming a lot of media, but like I took in like, I guess, 0.1% of some of the things that have come out of, all of the footage and the recordings that came out of what's going on. And the one of the things that, like, it just shows you, like, people talk about in Gaza there being innocent civilians. So there's the and of course there are babies there too. There are for sure innocent civilians, right? They haven't
Yeah,
done anything. But you have the one of the things that they brought out recently was a recording of one of the people, who one of the Gazans who went to Gaza and to do these atrocities. And he calls up, while he's in the middle of this, he calls up his parents. He calls up his father and his mother. Right? Did you see this thing?
I
And
heard
then
about that.
and then he's saying there, Father, mother, look, I've killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. Their blood is on me, and they're blessing him. They're saying, "Oh, that's so wonderful! I can't believe it. It's Allahu Akbar. This is fantastic." You know, uh, I mean, like,
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
that's
So, yeah,
yeah. He knew that they would be proud of him for going and doing this thing. That he's carrying their blood. Like, I mean, like, if I don't think I've ever heard of any like Western country, not just even talking about Israel, but for sure in Israel, where I can definitely justify it. I've talked to people that have, like, been in altercations with terrorists, etc. They don't go around saying, "Oh, look, this is amazing! I got their blood on my hands." You
yeah,
know, what is this? Is a different society. It's a different culture. It has they look at the world differently, and that's part of what's heartbreaking, right? Because like you said, it's like, so what is the shared platform under which we can have a conversation? If this is what you want, then
yeah. No, I think
yeah,
yeah, that part, like you said in earlier episodes, that part is going to be very difficult. It's also difficult for me. I wasn't really, under the impression that Hamas was like the friendliest neighbor, and all that. But I guess I cynically assumed like, okay, maybe
Vida,
money.
I'm sorry. Uh, just there's a little bit of clicking in the background. Are you moving the? I'm not sure if you're moving it in some way that's clicking or something. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I was. Yeah. Um, forgot what I was saying now. Sorry.
You were saying that like that this is the question of where do we go next? Considering that this is the people that we have
Yeah.
to talk to.
I was under no impression that they're, we're going to be best buds, but I thought, okay, maybe they're just a corrupt organization. Maybe they're power hungry. Maybe they're money hungry. There are plenty of reasons, you know,
Right.
to exploit people's suffering, and their leadership is sitting pretty in Qatar, and money. I was like, okay, maybe it's money or whatever. I didn't think that there was someone in earnest to talk to, but I think this obviously shook very deeply in a very, because it's not even just, it's the level of brutality, and it's the, like, it was planned, it was executed, and the joy that came from that. And
Right.
it kind of shakes you, but also I think it shakes me more. I don't want to say I can understand it because I can't. But like you said, people in Gaza live a terrible existence. I think you can radicalize people that are suffering for generations who, have lost people in air raids and whatever. I understand that. But the people in the West who were celebrating,
Right.
I don't understand it. Like I said, at the end of the day, I think everyone sees themselves roughly as a good person, and I don't see how you can fit that in and
Right. It
continue
also
about your
doesn't
day.
make sense. It's also not practical, right? Because even if you had some empathy for them, let's say if we go with the narrative, which I think is immoral and not a correct narrative that says, oh, the people in Gaza were, that we can understand somehow what they did. Let's even say you can understand it. Okay, fine. So what is your pragmatic solution, right?
Right.
Like, where is there? Do you think that it's, if you have again, if you have a kid or a friend, it doesn't have to be from a point of authority, just somebody that you interact with, and they behave like a bully, right? So is your solution to like encourage that because there's another bully in the, let's say you think there's two bullies, right? Like, I
Yeah.
understand that's how you're gonna approach this thing. That in what way
I will
does
say, to
this
be honest with you,
lead to a better place?
that's how a lot of people view it, and my family included. And I actually recently heard a 20-minute interview with one of I forgot his name, but he's like one of the experts on Iran at the Mizgavam Center or whatever, and he basically said,
Okay,
yeah, the way that, like it's who's going to be the most brutal so that that everyone around them knows not to mess with them. And I hate that.
that's the Middle East way. That's the
That's it.
Middle
Well,
East
it's the
way for
Middle East
sure.
way, but you think about World War II. He said, who beat the Nazis? Stalin. Stalin was equally
That's
brutal,
true.
in different ways. And it wasn't. There is, this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The West is going no, 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 and we're holding you to the standard. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't per se. I think there's a lot of hypocrisy that they find themselves to be the moral gatekeepers.
Right.
Um, but I'm not saying that we should be terrible because that doesn't help. But it
But
does,
what alternative? Right.
yeah, it does put a lot of constraints on you because you can't, you have somebody that's going to exploit that. Like you said, using civilian centers and building up, playing on the rules of international warfare because that the other side can't really afford from, an optics
Yeah.
perspective and a moral perspective to do anything about it. And I don't know.
Right.
I really
There's
don't know what to do from that. Like, I don't know where you go from there, and it's
yeah.
really
There
frustrating.
there are some more like right wing and even like Arab Israeli Arab supporters of Israel who have been saying that like they've been pushing Israel to do things like imagine if Israel would put up like a poster, like some even like privately funded, right? Would take some of the posters of the Hamas people that were captured, okay, and just humiliate them, right? Just put them like I don't know, line them up in a row. They're undressed because they take off their clothes so that to make sure they're not don't have any weapons, and
Yeah,
just take a picture of them, in their like in such a demeaning way, right? So the problem with that picture, and imagine if you plastered that like in the middle of like of Tel Aviv, right?
yeah,
So that the problem that Israel has is that will work. Anything you do works in opposite ways, right? In a Middle Eastern sense, that's a blow to the enemy's morale, right? We humiliated you. Here, we're showing everybody how strong we are. We humiliated you. That works. That deters people with a Middle Eastern mentality a lot of times from doing things because they see you're not afraid to do that. And here's what they'll suffer. They're not worried about death, but they are worried about their honor being hurt or something, right? I mean, if you're looking for a real place where there's like what's called like the real hardcore toxic masculinity, this is the region, right? That's the real. That's the OG. Okay,
yeah,
and but if you do that, all the West is going to go, oh my God, Geneva Convention, you're tormenting your prisoners, etc. And
yeah,
then so like and if you do the opposite, if you go around telling the world, look what they've done to us. On the one hand, everybody's like, oh yes, it's so terrible, but they're not doing anything about it.
yeah,
They still choose. But what you're doing to the Gazans is worse. So like, what options do we have?
yeah. I think that that's, and I don't know how it's going to change because no country can live by themselves. They need friends, but this pattern of having to prove ourselves and our humanity and our goodness, being the good little Jews, that act the right way to the West, is really problematic because the West is also responsible. They also have obligations. There's a lot of funding that's going, and things are being stolen, and that things are happening. And
Yeah.
again, why is nobody saying anything about Egypt? We want, if you want to do a humanitarian corridor, which even in the Russia-Ukraine war, and that's a brutal war going on for years, there
Right.
were humanitarian corridors. Sometimes they were bombed, not great,
Why
but
isn't anybody saying? Why isn't anybody saying anything about the fact that Hamas won't let the people
yeah,
move? Right?
yeah, they won't let
They're
them move.
shooting people that try to cross. They're shooting them.
Again, I'm not justifying, obviously, but I accept that Hamas is genocidal and terroristic and whatever. I'm not expecting a
Right.
lot from them, but you know,
Right.
the Egypt border, I get that, like, nobody wants this to be their problem, but is there not an obligation? Is the obligation only ours? Like, we pulled out a long time ago, and we're
Right.
still, the obligation in the eyes of the world is for us to provide electricity and water and things. And again, I don't want babies in the hospital to die. I'm not vindictive in that sense
Yeah.
at all. I don't want that.
Right.
But it's a very weird standard that only we
Right.
are
So I
in
have
this picture.
right. So I want to ask you, like, as we start to get close to a close. So, is your feeling that the people that you've spoken to that have, or the people that like the ones that are even a bit more well informed, like professors or whatever, like, is it your sense? I mean, I have my own views on anti-Semitism and where it comes from, etc. But uh, I keep on wondering how much of this is really people. I'd like to say that it's about people not being well informed enough, but then you see like the New York Times or these places like, how can I say the New York Times is not informed? Is that what we're talking about? Like, I keep on being led out, or and sure, on TikTok, people will do a like for something because they're just trying to go with a trend. They don't want to
Yeah.
stand up against the mob, so so 90% of what you see on, like, the 90% of the likes on Twitter or TikTok are just because, well, everybody else is doing it, so I'll do it too.
Yeah.
But do you have, like, you said you were going through, like, the different stages of grief. Do you have of do you have any kind of sense of what are the mechanisms that are at work here that are making people, you know is it just, one option is that it's just that the progressive ideology, as somehow, as I said, framed the Jewish people as white, and
Right.
that dogmatic way of looking at things automatically shields them from the need to think about what is really happening. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe the dogma is allowing people to take the easy way out without thinking too much. But or is it something else? Like,
I think there's probably more than one. I think, for the people that are 20s on Instagram, or even, young 20s, just kind of, you tend, especially in the States, and I mean everywhere right now, but everything, the political scene is very polarized. And so, like I said, I'm pretty left leaning because of my views on LGBT issues and all kinds of things. And so you have this, it feels almost like a popularity contest, right? You have like these representatives that are like the cool ones, and you agree with them on, I don't know, 70-80% of the issues, whatever. So you kind of just blanket the rest. Like, okay, if I respect
yeah,
their opinion here, like, if they must know what they're talking about. I think there's a good amount of swept along kind of there. I
yeah,
think there's also this, I don't know, I got the sense that there's also this little undercurrent of, like, we're going to stand up for, like, the little guys, the underdogs, against our own government, like, when I was talking to Susan, she was saying my tax money in Israel, the president already sends so much, and everybody's supporting. So I'm just watching out for these guys. So it really has nothing to do with Israel and Palestine. It has to do with me not trusting or not wanting to go along with my own government and kind of sticking it to them in a certain way.
interesting.
Um, that's the sense that I got from her, because obviously
Do you get a feeling
I'm
of her
sorry.
that if Biden would have stood up against Israel, she wouldn't have felt a need to stand up against Israel?
I don't know. I don't
I
know what
mean,
to
that's
tell
what the
you, to
sense
be
you got
honest.
from her. I'm not asking if that's true. I'm asking
Yeah,
if
I
that's the
don't.
sense you got from her.
I think that they see, which is surprising, because from the Israeli side, you feel like you're constantly not getting the full support that you would like. But I think
Right.
that like, kind of a privileged middle class, whatever, see that you can't say anything. They have this feeling of, like, oh, you can't say anything about Israel. It's automatic acceptance. And maybe in certain societies, like evangelical, more right, maybe there is a little bit of, it's a dicey topic, so people don't want to say anything. So it's easier to be silent. And they say, they have this feeling of, like, well, that's not right. I'm going to stick up. I'm going to use my voice, which, again, I respect in so many ways, but please be informed on what you're saying when you say it, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of kind of, I'm going to stick up for these people because nobody else is. Um, And honestly, for the New York Times and things, I think that I don't even know what to tell you. I want to be cynical and say, money for papers if you have these bombastic titles, or if you want to get everyone's talking about it. I don't know. I would hope that there's journalistic integrity, but
Look,
I don't.
I mean, like at least for universities, I can tell you that I don't know what part of this is this and what not. Of course, this is all, armchair psychology, but it is well known that both major media companies and also major Ivy League universities get a lot of money from Qatar. And one of my theories is that one of the reasons why they're not willing to say, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about the story is that you would think that not because they believe it, but just to pay lip service,
Right.
just so that people wouldn't, just to protect yourself from controversy. You'd say something, right? But they don't, and I was trying to figure out why. Like it doesn't even forget about. Let's say they hate Jews. What does it matter, right? Like or hate Israel. They're just hate. They're anti-Zionist. Whatever.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they say something about the people that were kidnapped, just and the atrocities, just to just say it? And
Yeah.
if they're bought, one way or another, if they have an endowment from Qatar of of $10 million a year, okay, then maybe that's what it costs, to buy your integrity. If you're a
Maybe.
school that needs to run, maybe
And I
I
think
don't know.
also, I would hope, and maybe I'm naive about this. I don't think that most people wake up and say, "I hate Jews" or "I hate whoever." Right? It's very, I would hope,
Right?
at this day and age, frowned upon to have that. But I think there's something very deeply embedded. We kind of we act like we're very technologically advanced, we're fancy, we've got all these gadgets, and we've dressed ourselves up, but the old world is not that far away. And we didn't come here by ourselves, and there's a lot of things that
Yeah.
are embedded that people don't even
Right.
realize. I mean, like I said, I went to Catholic school also for middle school. Yeah, there were Jew jokes, and I didn't, whatever, it's obnoxious, but like I didn't find that was the end of the world. But those are the little things, and those are the things you're allowed to
Yes,
say. And
there.
then all of a sudden, I remember this. I don't know why this popped up now, but I had a reunion for my high school, I think, and I went to dinner afterwards with some of the girls and her parents. And her parents are respected business people in the community, seemingly lovely people. And I'm not kidding. I was in shock when this happened. He basically went into this whole like Jews run the banks, Rothschild, whatever. Like everybody knows that. Just proclaiming it. I'm just sitting there like, what? Like I'm waiting for him to be like, just kidding. But no. And so
Yeah.
I don't think that most people wake up and are mutinous towards Jews, but I think that they don't examine a lot of biases because there's this whole like, Jews run the banks, Jews run Hollywood. Like we seem to be like this privileged elite. People very
Yeah.
conveniently forget that we were decimated and we were ethnically cleansed from half
My
the world. But
Right. My family was I wasn't there, but they were in Alaska a few years ago, like I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And so it was my parents and my two younger brothers, and they went to one of these they were in Alaska, so they went to one of these cattle driving somebody who has cattle and he's moving it from place to place. So they were talking to him, and he notices that they're wearing a kippah, a yarmulke. So then he says, "Oh, are you guys Jewish? You're from Israel?" So they say, "Yeah." So he says, "You know, you Jews, you figured out something about money. Because, I've never seen a poor Jew. And that's why whenever I have problems, like financial problems, I open up the Bible and I ask myself, what would a Jew do in this situation?" Now, he was saying that as a compliment.
yeah,
Now, the fact that an Alaskan cattle driver hasn't seen a poor Jew, I'm surprised he's seen any Jews, you
right,
know? And the people that he's seen are probably traveling from Israel, so maybe they're not that poor. But,
right,
or from other places in the country, whatever. But, he meant that as a compliment, but it's like
yeah,
there are these deeply rooted things, which I don't know why they move from one generation to the next, but they do.
yeah,
And I think that part of the surprise here, I think part of the reason it's so shocking is that we usually, like that guy in Alaska, if you would have to gamble if he votes Republican or Democrat, you'd probably gamble Republican. You'd assume, and with more traditional groups, you maybe assume that some of these things pass on as part of the tradition. I think part of the reason it's so surprising is not just because of that progressive ideology, should put people's pain in the center, and therefore, if you're in pain, we should respect that and try to come to your aid. It's also that um, we assume somehow that because people that are progressive are more college educated, I'm not sure if educated, but more college educated, tend to be more globalist, like cosmopolitan, you'd assume that somehow they would understand, that there's a lot of biases built in and we should ignore those biases, but they don't. And
Yeah.
that's the real the nefariousness of this thing called anti-Semitism. It just crops up with you're not even sure why, how is it still here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Vita, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If hopefully, there's things are heating up in the whole world. So, I don't, it's hard to know where the next place where there'll be like a hotbed of things changing, etc. So hopefully I won't have any really good reasons to talk to you again in this war, for this podcast. But thank you very much for sharing, and yeah, I hope that things work out well, and that your husband stays safe, um, yeah, and that everything, at least that whatever pain and suffering we go through as a country, as a world, as a people, that at the other end of this, things are better somehow.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Stay
Thank you.
safe.
Bye.
Bye.